You ever look back and realize you just traded all your life for a paycheck? Welcome back to The Hustle and welcome back to The Grind, everybody. Thanks so much, Zach, today for the super thanks and the beverage. This is going down real well on such a frosty kind of a day. But let's talk about the beginning of time when you were actually at your happiest in your career. I mean, we all go through different stages in our life, and I had that too. And I think back many years ago, I started my career at a time when I popped out of school. I went to school for engineering. I couldn't find any work, and I realized, you know what, I better do something different. I started doing something a little bit like, carpet cleaning. And I think about that now for a while, because at that time of my life, I wasn't getting paid very much, but I found it very engaging and rewarding because I was teamed up with a gentleman by the name of Gary. Gary, we'll just call it at that. Absolutely cool dude. Awesome guy, absolutely. And throughout the years, we've kept in touch, even once I left the job. But, Gary and I were teamed up, and we quite often tackled this job. It was cleaning carpets. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't super invigorating. It certainly didn't pay all that well. But it was interesting. We met new people every day, new households, new commercial buildings, new facilities, new place. And Gary and I were just on the same, in sync. Once in a while, you meet that person in your job front that you just find you're totally in sync with. Your synchronization is dialed in. You have lots of fun to talk about. There's always something new and exciting, because every time we'd get in the van together and head off to our first job, we'd always talk about, some new piece of news or what just happened in our life and our world. And it was such a great time in our lives. And Gary was just that personality that was chill but very outgoing, clean living, and certainly a personality that almost everybody could get along with. So Gary and I, we loved working in that career, and I loved doing it. But honestly, what was the pay? Not very much. I think back in the day, I don't even remember exactly. I was probably getting paid somewhere in that $12 an hour. Now, that sounds like a lot to some people, but for a person that had been, expecting a little bit of higher salary coming out of school, doing electrical industry, I was trying to get into there, just finishing up with the engineering schooling, and I was looking at doing something that was hopefully rewarding. You go to school, you spend some money, and then now you hope to just recuperate that. You've got student loans, and now the set expectation that we all have that, it's time. We've got to move on and do something more with our lives. But I was having such a great time working with Gary, and we did this for several years. The downside was every once in a while he would take a holiday and the boss would jump in, and the boss, well, let's just say he wasn't the easiest person to work with. He was very strict. He was extremely diehard. And if you even deviated, you would know it pretty quickly. So it wasn't a fun time. And whenever Gary went on holidays, usually a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks, that next time period would be absolutely devastating for me. And I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I quickly learned what a great job can be and what a job is more than. It's more than just the work. It's more than just the task. Your career, your job really is about the people. It's not about the fact that I was cleaning carpets or I was riding around in a van. It wasn't about that at all. There was a camaraderie that Gary and I had, and we enjoyed it, and it was a great time in our lives. And I really enjoyed it even with the low paychecks, because it was a very dire contrast. Once I started working with the boss, that I realized quickly, wow, this job, I could definitely leave it, because he wasn't an easy person to work with. And there was numerous times, because he was probably way too old than he should have been to even be driving and working. This gentleman was pretty much way beyond retirement. He blew so many red lights. I was kind of clinching the dashboard once in a while, where he just sailed through a red. I don't mean just turning red, going red. I mean, he's just coasting through a red light. And a few times I found myself literally just wiping the sweat off my brow in just that wow, was that close. You see, but I think back at that time, and I was living my best career. It wasn't the best career, and everybody, those high flyers, a lot of those that probably watch here, some of you might be VPs or directors or maybe even a CEO or two popping into the videos from time to time. Trust me when I say it's not about the big paycheck. That being said, I mean, that can be rewarding in its own way. Let's be honest. I mean, we all need money. We can all say we don't need money, but in some regards, money does make the world go round in some capacity. So you need money, I get it, but there's a strong element of you really have to enjoy the people you work with and the work that you do. You also have to feel like you're making a meaningful change out there. And while cleaning carpets wasn't so much a meaningful change in I wasn't enriching people's lives, in an insane way or anything. There was this feeling of accomplishment. You walk into a house, it was dirty, it was messy, and then you come out of there and it's looking gleaming and the customer's happy. And you know what? It wasn't an earth-shattering change in anybody's life, but you know what? You left, they were usually smiling, happy, they paid the bill, adios. And you know what was even more rewarding? When you see them the year after and the year after, and you see the same customers. You had a bit of an impact on their life in some way. They remembered who you were. They remembered maybe the company. But with that said, the company was really the owner and me and Gary. So it was me and Gary going out all the time. And so when they were calling us back year over year, month over month, that they were calling us back. And that made me feel good. I really felt rewarded in that job. Now again, the pay wasn't there, but I keep coming around. I really enjoyed my work because I worked with somebody that was just delightful. That being said, moved on many years, of course. Finally cracked a job. I started out in the trade. Okay, we'll start with that. I started out in construction trade. Wasn't really directly related to what I went to school for, other than there was the electrical field. But I started to apprentice. I started to learn the trade, the ins and outs. And essentially over the course of the next few years, I fast-tracked and hustled and pushed hard. And I even challenged a few tests in the apprenticeship just so I could quickly get my journeyman ticket. And I did that. And so I got my ticket. And I also enjoyed that work. Why? Because you meet some of the most colorful, entertaining, interesting people in the trade. And again, it was some of the grungiest, dirtiest. My first week, the boss told me, here, I need you to dig that ditch. It needs to be about 6 feet wide. It needs about 200 feet long, and it needs about 4 feet deep. You need to build this big trench because we're running a bunch of PVC conduit in there that are running for communication and some feeder cabling and piping and whatnot. So my first week, I spent digging. And I come out of there thinking to myself, is this what the electrical industry is about? Digging? Spending time on the end of the banjo? I didn't think that was really what I signed up for, but I kept grinding it out. I kept working through it. But as time went on, I really started to enjoy my work. I started working, learning more of the trade, learning more of the industry. I wasn't getting paid much. And I was even complaining at one point because I was doing a lot. I was learning a lot. I had gone to school, for engineering. Now I'm in the trade. I'm doing all these things. And yet my pay was still based on a first year, second year apprenticeship. And I talked to a journeyman that I used to carpool with, and he used to tell me, you know what? He said, don't sweat the small stuff, Mark. It will pay off in the end. You're paying your dues right now. Eventually you'll get your ticket. I said, a good friend of mine at the time was making good money, and he didn't even have to go to school for it. And I'm glad for him. But at the same token, it's like, what did I do wrong? Am I missing something here? And so the journeyman I rode with said, don't worry, it'll pay off. You'll do much better as time goes on. And I started to think more and highly of myself because I was really getting down. I was really getting down in the dumpers, and the thought of spending all this time in school and apprenticing and all these other things, and it wasn't paying off. I felt like I was trying to pursue a career. I was trying to make the earnings, and I was trying to make the big living and trying to get the big paycheck, but it wasn't happening. All I was doing was working hard and moving up. But what I didn't realize in the time, and I look now retrospectively, all those times that I was working hard, that I was grinding, that I was learning while I was earning was very beneficial because I was also enjoying. I was meeting friends. I was learning new skills. And I look back now retrospectively, that was a great time in my life. One which, of course, many times you wonder if you could take back because the years started sailing by, and the apprenticeship obviously means that you start to see these annual increases, and pay started coming with time. I started getting increases, pay raises upon pay raises, and this started happening. And then I finally started to make the paychecks. Then finally, I triggered, and I wound up with a career that was a lot closer to related. I got into the high voltage industry, it was electrical. I got in with an engineering house, and I spent time there, and I spent numerous years, probably 8 or 9 years with that group. And I learned so much on the industry, commissioning, testing, and I loved the work. I absolutely adored it. I loved the people I worked with. It was a fun time. And finally, the paychecks started to really climb. I started putting overtime, of course, recognized for your unique skill set. I did a lot of traveling, but I've spoken about this before and how the travel started to catch up with me. See, because I really enjoyed the work, but what started to happen, I started to have to spend a lot of travel time, a lot of time on the road, heading up to the tar sands, heading up to the territories, going to BC, going to Saskatchewan, heading all over the planet pretty much for the sake of work. I was even supposed to fly down to the Caribbean to do some commissioning there too, but that got kiboshed. I was just about everywhere, certainly in North America, for work, and I enjoyed it. But the flip side was I was getting further and further away from home, and it seemed like every month there was a new potential experience, which was fun on one hand, but that paycheck, even though it was rising and it was finally cracking that number, you know, that big paycheck that we all dream of, but I was doing it at a cost. See, I wasn't home anymore. At this point, pretty much getting married, and we started having a young family. And then I transitioned into another career because I said, you know, that type of job was very much commissioning, testing, and I had to do a lot of road trips. So I needed to find something closer to home. So herein lies another leg and segment of the career. And I transitioned into another big career, corporate environment, where at first I loved it. I was in the field. I was working home every day. I was getting the big paychecks. Life was good. I mean, I could not complain. The people I worked with were amazing, and I loved the work. It was pretty much everything that a person in my space could dream of. I enjoyed every single day. And I was showing up early. I was leaving late at the end of the day. I was grabbing some tools 20 minutes before closing time and heading back out to the field and do more work because I was that engaged. I really enjoyed the work, and I enjoyed the people I worked with. But things changed, you know. I started developing new skills, new networks. Next thing you know, I had people kind of elevate me, escalate me. I started getting injected into committees, started getting involved in a lot of big collaborative discussions, started hobnobbing and bumping elbows with some of the big players in the organization. And I really felt truly engaged for a while. I thought I was on the top of the world. I was certainly, doing fine on the paycheck side of it. I had no problems, no complaints there, but unfortunately I was realizing I was finally making it. Like it is many people's perspective, or many people would consider it truly making it, in quotes. And I use air quotes, very strongly here, because it was in fact just that. It was, many would consider I made it. I don't know if he made it. He doesn't look like he's making it too well over there, but a little dog who's not happy over there, just kind of checking out the scene. But anyway, it's always fun. You always never know what you see. I actually saw a coyote here earlier, and I saw a big coyote the other day. There's definitely some of those roaming around here, so I always keep my eyes open. But anyway, so I was doing fine in the career, and I was moving up and shaking, and so to speak. But what was actually happening on the peripheral, and I wasn't really paying attention, was I was giving up time, precious time with the family. I was giving up, in some cases, you could argue, even integrity. Sometimes having to go along with, senior management's drivers, and you feel like, yeah, that doesn't seem right. But you go along with it. You feel like that's just not me. And so you start to sort of shy away, and you start to feel like you're being tugged in two different ways because your moral compass is saying this and you're being pulled that way. But the paycheck keeps rolling, so you keep trucking. But what I didn't realize as much was the time I was spending away from home, because, I had a growing family, beautiful wife, and here I was spending all this time at work. I was working late, staying, of course, at the job, sometimes an extra hour or two every single day just to wrap up emails, because during the day you'd get pulled into sort of the day-to-day buzz of everything. And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, now everybody else has gone home. Now I better catch up on some of these emails. And so quite often you find that you're just spending time later into the evening. I was going in early in the morning. In most cases, I was earlier than most in the mornings. I was part of a big team, leading a team of professionals, in the industry. And certainly I felt like I was leading something, a bigger charge. So I was part of this big wheel, and I was part of something substantial. So I kept rolling with it. I was enjoying it. I was getting paid, and I was doing fine. And by most accounts and most assumptions, people would assume that exactly what everybody dreams of, have a career like that. And at the time, I thought so too. But then I realized I was giving up that time. I was spending time in the evenings. I was leaving earlier. Weekends, a lot of times, being called, and calls, or I was getting calls by, members of the team on weekends and evenings. And a lot of times it would drag me out of bed. Next thing you know, without even being on call, I'm having conversations at 3 a.m. that takes me to 8. And then I head on into the work and continue on that conversation. And this went on and on and on. I was sacrificing time, my time with the family, time that really mattered to me most. Because as I started realizing later on, these corporate environments just eat you up and spit you out. Because as we see, once you start to recalibrate your thoughts, once you start to reset yourself as to the person you really are, once you say, no, I'm reestablishing my objectives, my priorities, I'm even starting to reestablish my moral compass. Here, as soon as you start doing that, the organizations don't want you thinking uniquely. They want you following in a line. And as soon as I started to reorganize and re-strategize my own life and starting to reprioritize personal life, that's when I started to see the change. And it quickly became obvious to me that unless you're willing to do that, you have no place in corporate. And that's exactly what started to happen to me. I started recognizing that my own personal life was important. And for those that used to work with me, and I'm sure some of you who are actually watching, you know what I'm talking about. You know the space we work in or worked in. Some of you might still be working there, some of you maybe not. But you know exactly what we're talking about. They just consume until you have nothing left to consume but bone, then they spit you out. That's exactly what was going on. But I started to realize that I was trading my life for a paycheck. And it wasn't that important to me after. I started to realize the importance. I started to see the reality of what sacrificing. I have friends that were getting divorced. I saw people that were getting sick. I saw ex-coworkers a year into retirement that were passing away. I started to see all these life-altering events going on around me, and I'm circling around this orbit of activities, and I'm thinking there's no way I'm going down like this. I'm going to start refocusing on my family, my wife, my kids. I'm going to refocus on my health. And if the company can back me on that, super. But it was pretty clear to me that once I sort of started making those changes for myself, they don't get in line with that. Because while some companies do say that they support mental health, they support physical health, they support, your own well-being, they support work-life balance, all of that goes out the window at the end of the day. We know this. See, because what comes out of the mouth and what is reality when it's time to chop some heads, that's exactly what happens. There's a differentiation there to be made. So I realized that was time to make a change. Fortunate for me, timing was bang on. I was able to retire maybe a couple years earlier than I was planning, but it pretty much worked out fairly well for in the end. That being said, had I not been that close to retirement, what would I have done? I would have made a change. There's no question. What sort of change? Tried another department, which I already tried. Nobody was biting. I couldn't even get an interview. But I was literally on the verge. I was being coached by my wife. Go somewhere else. Find another company. Do something different. Go sell cars. I don't know. And I was truly going down that path. Had I been, say, in my early 40s and on that same position, I would not have stuck around. Because it was truly too toxic. It was imposing on my life and my family life. And there's a time when sometimes you got to get back down to the nitty-gritty. Get back down to doing those cleaning carpets because it's more of an engaging, interesting job. And sometimes you just have those jobs that you work with wonderful people. And I had that. And Gary was one such person. But time goes on, life goes on, and those changes happen. And as I see, like many of you, some of you get into great jobs and you're happy and you don't want to let go. But for me, I did. Things change. A lot of it's at the pursuit and the expense of trying to find that paycheck. And herein lies where I'm at today. I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. Again, as always, everybody, here, check out right there. That's my total story about where I came from and how it all began. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Great to see you there. and talk to you all real soon. Bye-bye.